Okay. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning. Welcome to Oslo. Welcome to the Recharge Global Offshore Wind Summit 2023. It's very nice to see you all. I'm going to start by thanking our sponsors, without whom we couldn't put this event together. So I'd like to thank Equinor, Aker Solutions, Nordvegen Vind, Fred Olsen Wind Carrier, Westwood Global Energy Group, Aggia, ABS and Wood Mackenzie. Thank you. A couple of quick bits of housekeeping before we get started. If there's a fire, which I sincerely hope there won't be, but the fire exit is out and up the stairs the way you came in. The toilets are the same direction, up the stairs, follow the signs for the toilets. And before we get started, I'd also like to encourage you to use our app, which is going to help you get the most out of the agenda we've got planned for today. You can see the QR code there. It's also on the back of your pass. Once you've downloaded it from the App Store in iPhone or Google Play Store, you can log in using your registered email address and the password you see there. And then you get plenty of options to find out what's going on, participate, get more information. So please do use it. So, here we are in Oslo. A year ago, we held this event in Washington, DC. And I think it's fair to say it's been quite a year for offshore wind since then. We've had some positive milestones. So the US has got commercial scale offshore wind in the water at Vineyard and Lassley, New York. And off eastern England, in my part of the world, we're seeing Dogger Bank emerge, which is, with the help of our friends from Equinor, taking offshore wind to a new level. And these projects are using 13 megawatt wind turbines, again, taking the industry to a new level. And over in China, we're seeing even bigger turbines, which we may come to later, and project development on a scale that hasn't been seen globally so far. But we all know that, unfortunately, a lot of the headlines around offshore wind in the last year haven't made such happy reading. It's been power deals cancelled, projects shelved, developers under pressure, suppliers in the red, policy that is weak or inadequate in some cases. But let's look at the bigger picture for a minute. In a couple of weeks' time at COP28, the world will be asked to endorse a tripling of renewable energy capacity to 11,000 gigawatts. It's a lot of gigawatts, and that journey is only going to be possible with the help of offshore wind. So I think hopefully together today, what we can do is we can talk about some ways to navigate through all those challenges that we understand are bearing down on the industry. We know what they're called, we know about inflation, we know supply chain constraints, rising cost of capital. As I've said, policy, we know the problems, how we work through and take this fantastic industry forward. And finally, it's right that we do this in Norway, which is a proud centre of the global offshore oil and gas industry and is now on its own offshore wind journey, which also we'll hear about during the course of the day. So, without further ado, I would like to welcome our first speaker to the stage. He's come all the way from Brussels to give us some insights into the European Commission's view on offshore wind. Torgeir Knudsen from DG NRC4 at the European Commission. Welcome. please take the stage.
Thank you very much, everybody, for this opportunity to address you this morning. I will, in my keynote, focus on the latest communication from the Commission on offshore renewables. That said, I will have to add that when we talk about offshore renewables, it's very much about offshore wind, which should suit this audience quite perfectly. This communication was launched on the 24th of October as a part of the so-called wind package. And the other part of that wind package is a so-called wind action plan, which is focusing on wind manufacturing industry, onshore and offshore. And it has a shorter time perspective as it is addressing the very difficult situation of the European supply chains right now. But I will try to give you a broader perspective on offshore and also a longer term perspective. And I would like to start by addressing the new ambition levels in the EU member states. They are expressed through these green bars here. They are expressed in so-called non-binding agreements, which were communicated to the European Union in January this year. So this is a brand new update. They compare with the blue bars, which are the ambition levels that the EU communicated back in 2000 in a so-called offshore industry strategy. And as you can see here, when we look at the left-hand side, the short-term ambition level has been raised quite dramatically. It has almost doubled. But this, of course, will not come without challenges, which I will go into later. If you take a look at the right-hand side of the corner here, we see that in the 2050 perspective, the new ambition levels of the member states are more or less on par with what we had as a goal in 2020. Just to give you an idea of what we have to achieve, today we have installed 16 gigawatts in the EU altogether when it comes to offshore renewables. So going from 16 gigawatts to 111 is going to be a very tall order. It means that we will have to install per year more than 10 times as much as we did last year. So that means that we have to install 12 gigawatts per year to get there. And with the background that we just did 1.2 last year, you can imagine that this is not going to be a walk in the park. But that is also why there's a good reason to have an offshore communication. So now I will talk a little bit about the challenges that we are going to deal with in the coming years. Let me first say that we will, of course, build upon the achievements of the offshore strategy. And with this communication, the Commission has then explicitly stated that we are dedicated to offshore renewables and offshore wind in particular, I dare say. But things will not come for free. There are certain things that we need to get right. And first of all, we need to expand the offshore grid, and we have to build and reinforce it based upon sound principles for cost allocation. We need to accelerate permitting. There are quite a few projects in the pipeline already, but they need to be realized rather soon than late. Third, we need to improve our system for maritime spatial planning and coexistence, which also involves certain challenges related to sustainability that we need to get right. And four, based upon the sabotage action on the Nord Stream, we also need to take into account that we need to safeguard the resilience of our offshore infrastructure, including maritime safety and security overall. And five, the Commission is dedicated to continuing its research and innovation efforts, including Horizon Europe. And just to mention an example, Horizon Europe will indeed be prioritizing floating offshore wind. And last but not least, it is very important for the EU to have internationally competitive supply chains based in the European Union. And this also involves a labor force that have the right skills going forward. I would now like to go into details into some of these areas, but not all of them. That doesn't time allow, but let me start with regional cooperation. This is going to be very important in order to ensure market integration and security of supply at reasonable cost levels for the consumers. And that is why we need offshore grids based upon hybrids and exchange of power so that we can reach out to all corners of the European Union. And this means that these kinds of infrastructure projects will be prioritized under something called the 10E regulation, which involves right to accelerated permitting and also right for funding, up to 50% for construction works and 50% for studies. Furthermore, we need to have a system for cost allocation among member states and also among project promoters and industrial stakeholders. So the Commission will provide guidance to this effect in June. We have already made a study on cost allocation that will be made public next week. So this is something that you might like to tap into on our website later on. And we're also working with so-called high-level groups that entails involvement of politicians at high level, ministries, and high senior officials in ministries to promote offshore infrastructure projects that are of high importance to the European Union. So this gives these projects political clout and helps the rapid implementation of the projects. And one thing that we are looking at now, which is also harmonized with the action plan, is to look at the auction system for infrastructure projects. We are looking at harmonizing criteria for auctions. We are looking at pre-qualification systems. And not least, we would like to see the member states cooperating on announcing their tender process so that we can possibly avoid bottlenecks in the supply chain, for example. Moving on, all of you know that offshore projects tend to be rather complex and lengthy. So that is why we need to have in place a good system for accelerating permitting. And we have, to this effect, revised two critical legislations, the Renewable Energy Directive and the revised 10E regulation. As for the latter, I would like to mention a concrete example. We now have a provision that says that all project promoters are entitled to have a single point of contact in each member state, so that they don't have to deal with many organizations in order to get their permits and licenses right. So this is a matter of getting more speed and also simplifying the procedures. And the EU in general will also provide technical guidance to the member states. We will provide technical guidance as how we can, or the member states can ensure transposition and implementation of the Renewable Energy Directive, including for enhanced and accelerated permitting. So we do have both strong and rather soft measures in place to help project promoters get their job done, so to speak, at a quicker pace. Another very important factor here is maritime spatial planning. We will not get anywhere unless we have sufficient space allocated for offshore grids and offshore wind development projects like wind parks. So what we're trying to achieve now is to move from, strictly speaking, national plans to regional plans, which means that hopefully we can preempt bottlenecks, tensions, conflicts of interest between various stakeholders upfront rather than later in the process. Second, we need to have a stronger focus on sustainability issues. We have a marching order for the European Court of Auditors, which presented its report in September, and they have identified a couple of areas here that is going to be important, and that is addressing the impact on ecosystems and biodiversity, and also cumulative impacts. We are doing quite a bit already, but we need to step up, and again, we intend to use Horizon Europe to promote and fund scientific studies in order to address these issues. And also, as a last point on this slide, it's very important that when member states are revising the maritime spatial plans, that the Commission can facilitate dialogue between various stakeholders in the member states through expert group meetings, and also provide funding for projects. For instance, it's very important to get the coexistence rights between fishing industries and the offshore wind industry, and also the maritime sectors. So it's very important that experts can actually meet and exchange experience and best practice. Last but not least, this is very important for you, I guess, that's the fact that the Commission is very much committed to sustaining competitive supply chains in Europe. And in this regard, there are certain challenges that are very much offshore related. We see one particular challenge now, and that is the fact that European ports do not seem to have the right capacity or the capabilities to support the rollout of offshore renewables, and wind in particular. One particular bottleneck is a lack of space for assembly and for doing maintenance operations. Ports also lack viable business models for these kinds of tasks. And they also lack predictability in terms of facing a project pipeline that is not always stable. It happens that projects are delayed and the capacity already then used in ports. To add to the complexity of the problem, ports also need to be part of the green transition, so they need to decarbonize and electrify their own operations. And this will also require space. If they are to, let's say, provide green fuels for specialized vessels being active in the offshore segment, they also need space for bunkering. So this is a rather complex challenge. I will also say that getting access to critical raw materials is very high on the agenda. We will adopt a Critical Raw Material Act in March. That's the plan. And we're seeking to diversify the sources of supply, entering into partnerships with, let's say, friendly countries. And we're trying to extract more rare earth elements in Europe. And also recycling of permanent magnets and doing more component manufacturing in the EU is very, let's say, prominent in this Critical Raw Material Act. I will then just finalize my introduction by saying that we will continue to work on the skills agenda. This is the year of the skills in the European Union, so it has a lot of attention already. But it's very important for us to work with the industry through, for example, Pact for Skills, in order to map the skills gap that we are facing. With increased activity offshore, there's no doubt that we will need people with more maritime experience, that we will need people with good competence within the field of ICT and maybe also artificial intelligence. So this means that there is plenty of things that we need to grapple with. So on that note, I would just then repeat what I said. For the European Union, it's very, very important to have competitive supply chains in Europe. This will be very important to reach the ambitions that I've described. But in addition to that, these ambitions level is fundamental in actually reaching the overall climate and energy objectives of the Union. So with that, I will thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you, Torgeir. So I think we heard the taste there of the level of ambition we're talking about here in Europe, and then you can extrapolate that up globally, and the complexity and range of issues that policymakers such as Torgeir are wrestling with. So, time for our first session of the day. On the eve of COP28, can offshore wind lead the charge to net zero? That's the first issue we're tackling. Now, throughout the day, we're going to hear from a range of experts who are going to be giving us insights into the offshore wind picture, and I'm very pleased to welcome the first of those, who's going to share some insights into the global scenarios we can expect for offshore wind, and that's Rikke Norgaard from Agir Insights. Rikke, the stage is yours. Please come up.
Thank you, Andrew. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to be here today in Oslo to provide you with a global overview of the offshore wind sector, as 2023 is coming to an end in one of the most turbulent years in the sector. So my name is Rikke, and I'm the CCO at AG Insights. And we are providing technology-driven decision tools and data and in market intelligence for the offshore wind sector. We cover all markets globally. And we advise developers and governments on big topics in the sector. So here you see a map of announced projects globally, marked with purple dots. And then you can see our base forecast towards 2035 in each of the regions globally. And you can see here that the regions that are driving the build-out are, first and foremost, China. We're close to 200 gigawatt, followed by Northwestern Europe, Northeast Asia, and then North America and Southern Europe. These markets we label as the early innovator markets, whereas the fast follower markets will start a bit slower, but they will also come into play by 2035, and that being Latin America, Southeast Asia, and Australia and New Zealand. So here, when zooming in a bit on technology, if you take a look at the technology split of the expected build-out globally, we can see that only about 250 megawatt of floating will be in the water as of today. And we forecast that by 2030, we'll look into around 1 to 2 gigawatt ending by 2030, deployed, ending around 60 gigawatt by 2040. So I think it's fair to say that the build-out of floating wind is happening much slower than anybody expected only a few years ago, due to various reasons that we also will be touching and discussing upon today. But we really see that the build-out will start a bit later, but when it starts, it's going to happen very fast. Now to focusing in on a few of the key events that we've seen this year. It's been a few, but here you can see to the left that one event that was giving headlines in the industry was the outcome of the German auctions this summer. That was labeled as being extremely expensive. But if you compare apples to apples and adjust lease prices to present values to 2023 numbers, you can actually see that the German lease prices are lower than the UK, around 4. And also that the New York bids last year were even lower. Payment profile plays in here because the payments in Germany happens after COD, whereas the payments in the US and UK happens during development. There's also, of course, a lot of other aspects to this, such as the German scope is de-risked as the transmission scope is handled by TenneT. And then you can also talk about emerging market effects in the US. It's still an early market, so it should be cheaper. But it's just an example of there's a lot of things happening fast, and sometimes it can be hard to kind of compare across. To the right, you can see that the latest CFD round 5, with the big flop of no offshore wind bidders, leading to this very recent announced administrative strike price that has increased significantly since previous round, about 66% for fixed bottom, and 52% for floating. So there is a lot of things happening very fast. Here you can see if you look to the US, which is also taking up a lot of attention in the industry these days, we have quite a scattered a map where you both can find projects that has been paused. You have the Ørsted's Ocean Wind. You have PPA contracts being terminated across states, so both in New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. We have PPAs in New York not being renegotiated, that may be cancelled, we don't know yet. And we don't know what the consequences will be by walking away from contracts. But we also have newly awarded PPAs from the state of New York of 4 gigawatt. And we have this expedited RFP just recently launched by NYSERDA as well, giving some kind of optimism that it will happen. There will be offtake after this turbulent time. So, with all this being said, we are looking into next year being a very interesting year for the sector, because if you look at all the announced auctions coming up next year, you have 60 gigawatt that has been announced to be auctioned out next year. This high capacity amount is partly driven by government's targets towards 2030. If they need to reach those, they need to auction out capacity next year, the latest. 50 of these gigawatt will be auctioned out in Europe. You can see Norway is up there in 2025 with a range of 4.2 to 10 gigawatt, about 3 to 4 projects. Denmark also have a lot, like a big range of about 5.8 to 17.6, and you have the UK round 6 that has undefined capacity. So of course there is a lot of uncertainty on these numbers, but the overall message is that it's going to be a lot of competition. We believe that there will be a lot of competition, especially in Europe, where you still have areas and lease areas with really good site conditions and in stable, mature markets. So it's our belief that there will be a lot of interest and a lot of activities and a lot of competition across markets. We also see that governments are thinking hard about criteria for auctions, how to ensure that the bidders will stay around and get it built. So there's a lot of movements in terms of frameworks. That being said, there's still a lot of differences in frameworks and designs across, meaning that there will be opportunities for many players having different capabilities and different preferences for bidding into contracts. So, all in all, we will say that, in summary, there is a lot of market correction ongoing in the sector. That will be transferred into next year in 24, maybe also early 25. A few events that has been really challenging the industry is the supply chain that is suffering. Inflation increases, macroeconomic events that was hard to foresee have resulted in significant price increases globally. And you can also say that it's really been a buyer's market for quite some time. And it's been a long period of 10 to 15 years with everything happening in a good, projects were being built at time, to within time limits and on budget, and supply chain were getting more and more efficient. So we see it as a good thing that there are a bit of a market correction happening. You can say that there's some bad timing happening for the next market, such as the US, where we see existing agreement with limited supply logins are no longer feasible. causing a pullout that we've never seen before, causing project impairments. And we see projects being put on hold, not only in the US, but also in mature markets in the UK. So basically, developers, they are pausing their uneconomically projects, setting kind of realistic strike price expectations towards authorities, and also highlighting that indexing tariff in US needs to come into place in order to ensure a sustainable build-out for that market. If you look a bit more to the future and where we see some optimism happening, we see that the developers are really focusing on the mature, lower risk markets, securing a steady build-out, while the fast follower markets, they will develop with a delay. We also see that there is an overall re-evaluation of the build-out of floating. LCOE is expected to drop towards the 70 euros per megawatt hour by the end of the 2030, and that will be accelerated post 35. Signals of optimisms. We have the very ambitious pipeline announced for the coming years of auctions being leased out. We have the recent announcement in the UK giving a lot of comfort to that part of the industry. We have New York that are really taking the lead in the US, saying that this will happen despite the recent turbulence. And we also see that suppliers are slowly returning to a profit level again. But that being said, there's going to be things happening going into next year. But overall, we believe that the result on the back of this will be a resilient and sustainable industry in the long term. So this was a quick overview of the global market, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Rika. Thank you very much. Some real insight there into some of the issues we're going to touch on probably very soon. Auctions and a lot of auction activity to pursue these tremendous targets. Well, I'm pleased to say that it's time for our first panel discussion, which I have the pleasure of hosting. And we've got a great lineup for you, and I'd like to welcome them on stage. We have John Dugstad from Norwegian Energy Partners, Ragnhild Catalan from Nexans, Bart Willems from Yandernal, Philip Moline from Vattenfall, Christian Michelsen from Aker Solutions, and Tony Christian Tiller from Equinor Renewables. Please join us up on the stage here. Well, welcome. Thank you all very much for joining our panel, and we have a great mix here of people who are in the supply chain or experts on the supply chain, along with some developers who are actually paying for and building the projects. So we're going to get the views from all sides here, I believe. So let's backtrack to the high-level agenda here. Offshore wind has to lead this charge to net zero. That's what we're told. That's what COP28 will no doubt underline. It's going to contribute big amounts of gigawatts. Really, unless you want to build a lot of nuclear power stations, there's really no other power source that can deliver this type of scale as Equinor and SSE are proving at the moment off of Eastern England. But But policy is key. And we've heard already some of the policy challenges that the industry faces. So I'm going to ask our panelists to, first of all, give us their assessment of offshore wind's state of readiness to lead the net zero charge. What are the key challenges and what needs to be done? And then I'm going to ask them, what can policymakers do to help? What's maybe the one or two things that could really, from their perspective in the industry, make a big difference? So I'm going to start with John Dugstad from Norwegian Energy Partners. John, I mean, you go out to the world with Norwegian Energy Partners promoting Norwegian know-how, offshore engineering know-how, and increasingly offshore wind know-how. So you see a lot of participants in the global supply chain. Give me your assessment of where we are, our fitness to lead the net zero charge, and maybe what needs to change.
I think we've come a long way. Let me start there. I think the supply chain has built the necessary skills and built the necessary competence to build what we are looking for. What is, of course, lacking is the capacity. And you know, to bring capacity, you need to visualize where it takes you to enable the investment. So I think we are at the stage that we do have the competence, we do have the skills, we do have the experience. We've been doing quite a bit of what needs to be done, but we're not quite there in terms of you know, putting cash behind to create the capacity that we need to build those projects that they're licensing or permitting in Europe potentially over the next years. Ricky mentioned competition. I'm not so sure it's going to be competition amongst developers for projects or competition amongst countries for developers. So I think it might change a bit because there is not enough capacity, not enough skills to develop and start developing what we're looking to develop.
Okay, so some constraints in the market. So policy. What can policymakers do to address these constraints that you see?
I'm impressed by what European Union is doing because they're putting a lot of weight behind policymakers in Europe in general, with all those collaborative efforts in terms of the ONDP. I've learned this small shortages now, and the NZIA, also the industry build out for Europe, and I think that also you know, gives some signs for governments that they have to think not only ambition and targets, but they also have to think how we're going to do this, how will we enable all of this, and I think you know, since we are closely up to before COP28, I think governments not only in Europe but around the world need to understand the value of renewables altogether and the value of offshore wind in Europe as part of the electricity mix. So that will allow them to put enough cash behind the strategies and the ambitions that are already there. So I think they're well on the way. I think the European Union is showing the way to some extent. And I think the collaboration amongst nations, like we do see that in Europe increasingly, will also allow for holistic planning of the seas and holistic planning of grids and holistic planning of those licensing procedures that we see coming.
Okay, thank you. Ragnhild Katteland, Nexans. Now you and your competitors are providing the power cables that link our offshore wind farms to the shore, and without what you do, it's a pretty futile exercise because they would be spinning away in the sea prettily and producing nothing. And that involves factories, expanding factories, and it involves investment in technologies, because technical innovation in your sector has proved extremely important for underpinning the kind of scale-up we've seen. We couldn't do it with old power technology. So from your perspective, take the temperature of the industry, fitness to lead the net zero charge, and then in a minute we'll talk about maybe what policymakers can do to help.
Thank you for that. What we do, we try to work as closely as we can together with all stakeholders in the supply chain. That means both the developer, but also our suppliers. Because if we are not having the full supply chain, we will not succeed. It doesn't help if you have capacity for a cable, if we don't have a vessel, or if we don't have raw materials to produce the cable. So we have to work across the supply chain. What the industry, and I'm talking in particular in Europe right now, what we have done is that we have expanded quite a lot. We have doubled the capacity now here in Norway. We have made a new capacity also in the US as Nexans. All our competitors are doing the same thing. So we are really on the track of investing for new capacity going forward. It's no doubt about this one. But to do that, we need predictability. Without this, we cannot do it. And why we have been able to expand, as an example, in the US, is because we had 2 frame contracts with 2 major developers. Why we are expanding in Halden is that we had frame contracts with developers. Remember the supply chain. We earn the money on the project itself, and then when we have delivered it, we don't have any more earnings. So we have to have the payback within the projects. Now, recently, this summer, we signed a frame contract with TenneT. They're really going forward as a good example with large frame contracts, which gives us the possibility to invest in a new vessel, purpose-built cable laying vessel. That would never happen if we do project by project as we did in the past. So predictability of projects coming, but also a much longer-term vision, meaning that as suppliers, we need to be involved at a much earlier stage than we were in the past. Just as an example, to build a cable factory, you can think it's quite easy to build a factory, but it takes, from you start, it takes 3 to 4 years. But then you start to produce. When you have produced the first prototype cable, it takes 1.5 to 2 years to qualify the cables before you even can start mass production. So we're talking about a timeline here of 4 to 5 years before you have something new to deliver to the market. So of course, we need to be part much, much earlier. And I think that is a key for our suppliers. We need to involve them at a much, much earlier stage than we did in the past. And predictability, to be sure that the projects are going ahead as planned, all of these things is very important.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the US, and I know you've delivered the first US-made offshore wind cable to a US project, and that's a great milestone for that for the industry in the States. But I guess when you see when you signed your agreements, but when you see the turbulence there's been in the market post those agreements, you know, we all know what's happened. Projects that seemed rock solid, with question marks, not just over their power deals, but in some cases over their future. How does that make you think for the future about similar arrangements? I mean, do you see this as something that really is in the nature of large infrastructure projects around the world, and you can do, or do you see it as a more fundamental concern with the offshore wind market?
Clearly, what has happened in the US has disturbed us quite a lot. I mean, of the project that was on the list here, we are part of 3 of them. So clearly, we are spending a lot of time working on how to accommodate, how to change, how to adapt, etc., etc. And that being said, which we have not touched upon that much here already, is the cost. We have to try to bring the cost down for these installations. And if you have a lot of changes all the time, you are driving the prices up. You have to bid on several more projects. You have to do more work on each project, which doesn't give, in the end, any value. What's good with what we have done, though, is that we do have frame contracts or long-term relations with two of these developers. And I do believe that, this is no secret, Ocean Wind has been cancelled, but as they have other projects in the pipe, it's replaced with another project. So we can do these things if you have frame contracts. You cannot do it if you have single contracts. So for the longer term, I'm not that concerned, but of course it creates a lot of disturbances and it is costly. And we all have to pay for that, and that's definitely not good. We have also been fortunate enough that when we had available capacity due to changes, we could use that capacity to actually deliver cable to Europe.
Yeah.
So we also use this type of flexibility into the supply chain. But yes, it is worrying. And also then it is really also showing that you cannot build large investment industrial setups in each location. You have to think that you have a large industrial setup, that you are serving a larger area, because you need to have this flexibility. We know that things are changing. We know that things will happen. So we have to, in a way, build in some security and flexibility into the way we're working.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Christian, Aker Solutions, another absolutely key supplier to the offshore energy industry more widely. Again, you see projects and clients around the world, all shapes and sizes. From your point of view, give us the temperature of the industry, and then let's talk about maybe any policy areas that you believe could be addressed that would help from your perspective.
Yes, we are a supplier with many products, not only cables, but we are delivering vessels, foundations, now as well HVDC substations. And we see now that it's being tendered earlier and earlier, which like now for a substation it's like 7 years before delivery. And that's of course causing problems again with the inflation. How are you going to price a project that is delivered 7 years from now? And looking at the inflation that has been now. But also we need to start early, like you said, with design, for example, with the vessels as well, because the vessels are not available either many years from now. So we need to, for a substation as an example, we need to design it against the vessel sometimes as well and make sure that that's available in that time of delivery. But and again as well, high voltage equipment of course is a key product, which of course or else it would just be an empty box. So that's important to take into account. And one of our other product areas is as well like for bottom fixed foundations, for example. We see that there are many projects requiring more complex foundations because the turbines are getting bigger. So then, for example, one project that needs 60 jackets, we are looking into investing in our yard in mid of Norway. And just to invest in that yard takes also several years. We need to have new areas because these things require a lot of space. And again, then we need to apply the governments for, of course, permits to build and make sure that's in place. But it's also very important for us to have predictability because we cannot also make a very huge investment if suddenly projects becomes cancelled or the market disappears.
I think you've touched upon probably a couple of very important themes of the day. Maybe there is, and it's already been mentioned, there's predictability. Reinhild mentioned it as well. I mean, and also the timescale of the projects and the products that you're all working with. Offshore wind is a long and complicated business. Have events of the last few years, in terms of the economic backdrop, the financial backdrop, the pressures that we've seen, suddenly appeared out of nowhere in some cases. Others have been brewing perhaps for some time. Has this been a lesson perhaps to us that predictability in an unpredictable world is tougher than we maybe thought when offshore wind was in an earlier phase of growth, when maybe capital was a lot cheaper, maybe we didn't have a Ukraine war, we didn't have the levels of inflation that we've seen. Have we kind of learned some lessons about how offshore wind needs to set itself up to deal with the unpredictable?
Yes, of course, because no one had predicted the Ukraine war and what that happened to the material prices. So a more balanced contracting model, for example, towards our clients, because we hear that more and more we can go away from a lump sum contract, more of a cooperation agreement, because how can a company take a risk on a material cost of billions of kroners 7 years from now? These contracts can almost bankruptcy different companies as well.
Yeah.
And we have seen a few of that examples in the industry as well. Suppliers have lost a lot of money. So, and then again, there's also, this is the mature market for bottom fixed wind, but we also are looking into where we should invest when we come to floating wind, because a lot of countries are flagging a lot of projects, but will, for example, Italy build the first projects? Will it be Portugal? Will it be the UK? And then we have to also walk around the different local content requirements. So where should we invest? Should we build a yard or invest in a yard in the UK, or will that only be one project that we could go? Because we cannot invest in all countries in Europe, basically. And we are a big company, but in the global scale, we're not big enough to invest in 10 countries at the same time. So can European governments, for example, cooperate more among each other and have, like for Airbus, for example, where you make different parts in different countries, and they could do what they're best at, for example.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, Bart, Jan de Nul, I mean, you're also involved in many of these dilemmas that our two previous speakers have raised. I mean, you're in the business of big, expensive vessels without which nothing gets put in the water, and I think it's just been mentioned. You're asked to take risks in investing in that huge capital expenditure. Please give us, your take on the temperature of the industry, fitness for net zero, and how policymakers can help, and also maybe that issue of is the balance of risk now being more sensibly addressed across the supply chain, rather than possibly as before, the supply chain being asked to bear a lot of it alone. So, take it away.
It was a lot to take in, but okay.
Yeah.
No, I think there's been a lot already said, both in the presentation as in the other speakers. I think I heard a lot of things about predictability, which is, of course, for us as a vessel owner and vessel builders, something which would help tremendously. We've heard a lot about the continuity of the supply chain being there for us. But from our point of view, and what I haven't heard here yet is the term standardization. And standardization for us is the most key element in letting us do what we are good at. And that is building vessels capable of installing all these components in the sea. And with the current market, and there's been a lot of doom and gloom with the recent year, I don't think we are in that bad a shape. I think we are, as an industry, actually quite good. This has just been a year where the supply chain and the developers have just said, until here and no further. I think it was the first time that there was a consensus, and I think the UK round 4 was the best example where nobody played ball, and I think that was a very, very strong statement. But that being said, if you look in the future, you see these components growing, growing, and growing.
Yeah.
There is no certainty for us. Will there be a 20 megawatt turbine, a 22 megawatt turbine? We're just putting Dogger Bank in. I mean, we've built 2 vessels, what can be considered for now still one of the most performant vessels that there are, with Voltaire and Les Alizés. We are working on Dogger Bank, and we're already facing some challenges in respect of the size of these things. We're 1 year in the vessel being built.
Yeah.
We should be able to look at a horizon of 15-year write-off. That is approximately what the shipping industry does. And I always give the example, when I was starting in this business 15 years ago, if I would have told anybody that there would be a 1,500-ton monopile 20 years ago, they would have laughed me out of the room. We're looking at 4,500 tons now. Where does it stop? And that's the thing. Foundation size, or weights, and turbine sizes. And if there is no strict outlook and limit there, standardization, we will no longer be in a position where we can invest. That's the bottom line. And predictability helps, yes, and there are frameworks agreements. I think you gave the example. We have done the same with RWE. Of course, that gives some breathing room to see what the next investment should be. But without that, and I think the market is shifting towards that a little bit more, without that, it might be a little bit more doom and gloom than what we are currently seeing.
Okay, I mean, you've touched on something that's a huge talking point for the industry, which is the size of turbines. And we're going to hear later today from 2 OEMs who may, without wishing to prejudge anything, may have divergent views on this matter. But no, you've come down firmly, I think, on the side of we need to consolidate around a certain scale of components, and to give you the time to make the investments you need to make without, as you've put it, seeing expensive vessels already challenged a year into their life. So to be clear, to the turbine makers, and by extension to the developers, it's time to take stock, pause, use what we have.
I think you're right there, and there is a discussion ongoing, should it be government-led or not? And there are different views on that. I personally believe that it is the market that should be able to regulate itself. I'm not a big fan of having limits imposed by public instances or governments. The only thing that we have to watch out for is that we again get that predictability. Because when we would invest in an even bigger vessel, we don't want to end up in the Airbus A380 scenario, where we then all of a sudden are predicting something where somebody says, oh no, well, now we're going to stop. And in all honesty, we've been talking to most OEMs, turbine manufacturers, for years now. But in all honesty, the transparency there on what the plans are, and probably for good reason, is not always there, and that doesn't make our job easier.
Yeah.
It doesn't. And then we come to the communication part that my colleague there said. There needs to be a communication which is industry-wide, across the board, because making, for example, a set limit in only Europe or only US or whatever is not going to work. It needs to be worldwide. And that's why I think government intervention is not going to work. And it needs to be the industry that has to do it.
Well,
I think we can, to be honest.
I mean, putting it frankly, there's absolutely no sign of, for example, OEMs in China setting limits on the size of the turbines that they are making and that they want to deploy in Europe, in some cases, in new markets, maybe Latin America and Asia. So it's, there's no sign of that consensus being reached, is there? At the moment?
No, not publicly. If you talk and read between the lines, I think we will get to a certain point where there is a limit, pure from practicality point of view. Whether that's then a 15, 20, 22 or higher, that doesn't even really matter for us. As long as we know what the standard will be and what the maximum will be where we are going to get in a certain amount of years. We can reassess it after a certain point in time as well. It doesn't have to be set in stone forever.
Yeah.
But it needs to have that outlook, predictability, again, for at least a period which we can be sure we can have a financial investment which will bring us something to drink and eat from.
Very interesting. Ron Hill, I think you wanted to make a point and then we'll move on to our developers.
Just echo.
Yeah, okay. Well, look, we've heard some fascinating insights into the supply chain there, and now it's time to talk to people who actually pay for and build the projects. Tony, I'll start with you if I could. Equinor, you know, obviously an oil and gas company that's been a real pioneer of floating offshore wind, of all offshore wind. I mean, some of the earliest projects on my home patch in the North Sea have been courtesy of Equinor. So I'll go back to our main point: fitness to lead the charge to net zero, and then perhaps we can delve into some of the kind of policy and industry issues we've heard so far. So.
Sure. What was it Fatih Birol said the other day? Best in a very poor class, I think he said, instead of Equinor. I'm just really happy you didn't introduce me as a supply chain expert, because I see some familiar faces and they know I'm not a supply chain expert. But I have my background in politics also, so I can perhaps reflect a little bit on the political side. But first of all, just some key messages from us, obviously. I mean, the last year and a half has been pretty rough, I think, on everyone. And I think it's good to remind ourselves that, you know, offshore wind is here to stay, and that's something that we firmly believe in. It's really exciting times for us in Norway now, where we are, looking at auctions maybe next year. So, but I mean, you have to also be patient in this game. It's been 14 years ago, I think, since the Norwegian government enacted the Offshore Energy Act, and 13 years this year. So maybe 14 years next year when we finally get to an auction. So it really is sort of a long-term game where you need to be patient. And also we now see, you know, the same cyclical trends that we used to from oil and gas, so we just need to handle that. I think, you know, having been one myself, I sympathize maybe more than the average guy in the street with the politicians. And it couldn't have been easy for them either, you know. And politics do change. I mean, less than 2 years ago, the blueprint for Sørlige Nordsjø II in Norway was a hybrid project with no state support. We ended up with a direct to shore project with a substantial level of support. But the point I wanted to make, and you all have touched upon it, is, you know, politics is a messy business, but it's also transactional, and we're part of this now. And I think, for example, the Norwegian government is paying up 23 billion Norwegian kroner, about 2 billion euros for Sørlige Nordsjø II. Is that about right?
Potentially.
Potentially. Yeah, we'll see. That's very good of you to say. But you expect something in return from that, right? you want to make sure, we talk a lot about the supply chain here. I mean, maybe there's two ways of fixing that. You go to China or you build it up locally. Is it really an option to go to China? Well, I don't have the answer, but I could only speculate in terms of, governments putting up all this money. They want to see some jobs, right? They want to see activity. On the other hand, you need to protect consumers, also known as voters. So, for example, I read Governor Hochul of New York when a couple of months ago with all the fuss over there, and I swear it could have been written by any politician in Europe, Norway, anywhere. It's all the same, So as an industry, I think that let's just keep on working with the authorities, and also make sure that we deliver on these fundamentals, that we deliver on jobs, and we deliver on and make sure that we get this projects executed on time. Because to your first question, there's no way that politicians can reach their targets and their ambitions, without us. The climate targets, we can just forget about them. Yeah. And that's why we can't afford not to turn this ship around and to make it happen.
Okay. No, I mean, I think you're absolutely right that offshore wind is crucial to any policy ambition. Let's talk about, if we could talk about New York briefly. I mean, Equinor was, you did what the politicians, what the authorities there wanted. You moved early. You went into the market. You took a level of early mover risk. Mm-hmm. You developed a project. You did a deal, and you invested a lot of money just to get to that point. And then you found that for some of the reasons we've already discussed, that deal no longer worked. Yep. And I think most of us here know that you're currently involved in a process of renegotiation, effectively, with the state of New York. What has this process or this outcome taught us about how policy needs to conduct itself? Have we seen a failure of policy? Have we seen policy overtaken by events? Have we seen a policy that was over too long a time scale? Are we looking at failures of permit? What's actually gone wrong here, and how can we fix it?
It's a really tough question, and I need to be really, really careful there. And it's also sort of outside my domain. It does say Norway there, right? But I mean, nobody could have. Someone actually said no one predicted the Ukraine war. I didn't, but some did, but we didn't listen to them. But it certainly was a surprise to most of us. And who would have expected, a 40% kind of inflation in such a short time? And then it's difficult for back to my previous point. It's really difficult for politics to adapt to that kind of environment. And it's easy in times like that also. The messy stuff in politics comes forward. It's easy to be a populist. It's easy to, have you seen Fox News coverage on offshore wind? Just go on YouTube and you can't sleep at night if you do that. It's far out. But it turns out to be such a political issue, right? But I think, maybe it was prudent the way it's been handled. I think we handled it prudently. There's good dialogue. There's been some developments just, lately, and we're committed to that market in the longer term. So, but yeah, we need to adapt, and politics need to adapt, and that's why, back to my previous point, we need to work together. I think that's the best thing I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, bring it close to home, I guess. The points that were made earlier. I mean, you're building Dogger Bank, which is it's going to be a terrific asset to the UK's power mix. So thank you for that. You're welcome. Yeah. But we've already heard, that the scale of turbines that you're using, these GE machines, you're pushing the boundaries, and you're asking your supply chain to push the boundaries. Now, the point's been made, do we need to draw a line in terms of the, almost the level of innovation, because that's what it comes in, scaling up is innovation. and the offshore wind industry has achieved what it's achieved off the back of innovation. Do you believe we're now at the stage where we need to kind of, for the sake of scale and speed and the ability of these guys to order the ships and to build the factories, do we need to say, right, let's components we've got, we know they work, they're big, they're powerful, let's call a halt?
Is this like a game show where you get to call a friend for advice? No, I think you brought it up, right? The standardization. That's what I keep hearing internally as well all the time. And I think it's quite obvious that this industry hasn't reached a level of standardization where we need to be. I know the Norwegian market best, obviously, and you go to any conference and you'll see 5, 10, 15 different concepts, and obviously not all of them have a right to life. And I think so far you had the bigger is better approach. I wouldn't predict where this stops, and I think the more important question is who gets to decide that. And we all know, bigger has some benefits. You need fewer foundations, for example. You can save some capex there. On the other hand, tried and tested is perhaps also good. So I can't give you a straight answer to that, really. But
just don't let the engineers decide.
Yeah, no, yeah.
because then you
will can add another 10-15%.
Yeah, we'll be here next year talking a total different story. But
no, but I think it's it's a discussion that we need to have. But
yeah. John?
Just since we're talking standardization, and it's a really important question, I think, for the industry. But as capacity is lacking, and as the supply chain is writing more and more framework agreements to enable developers to deliver on those projects that they have been licensed, or which is going to be permitted or licensed or PPA'd or whatever you might call it, throughout the next couple of years, I think this might, to some extent, will sort it out by itself, because there won't be capacity with those turbines, which are huge, because these guys will not deliver them. So the framework agreements will not aim for those largest turbines. And if governments are listening, they will probably be creating criteria which will allow for European turbines, or potentially American turbines, but rather not turbines with less sustainability, for example. So I think the combination of government and the capacity need to build all of this will kind of sort that out by itself.
Yeah.
Because there will be standardization to some degree, but there will be incremental innovations as we go along.
Okay, great. Right, Philip, last but by no means least, Vattenfall, active all over Europe, in some of the most kind of vibrant markets and challenging markets. I mean, you've seen all sorts of policy, so I'm really interested to hear your views on what's working and what isn't. But give you the chance for our kind of headline question. Fit for net zero, offshore wind, and if not, what are the challenges? And then let's chat about policy a bit.
Sure. So I think a lot of what I was also going to say has been said. So I think we're all in general agreement on when we see the problems. Maybe about the state of the industry as a whole. I think at Vattenfall, and I don't know if we were the ones that invented this or if it comes from somewhere else, but we often speak of the perfect storm right now. But also a storm is sort of transient and it passes. So we have a strong belief in sort of the fundamentals of offshore wind, and that the current struggles are going to pass. You've mentioned the topic of standardization, and we don't know where the limit is, who decides that. What we know as developers is that as the market matures, we're going more and more towards financial auctions, uncapped financial bids. These force us to look at cost and to also drive suppliers to innovate. And so far, as you've mentioned, bigger has been better, at least for the developer business case. So that's probably not sustainable moving forward. That being said, I think indexation was already mentioned. I think that is what sort of took the industry by surprise. We come off a lot of years of sort of continuous decreases in cost, and then suddenly, and yeah, whether that was predictable or not, I guess can be discussed, but at least the industry wasn't prepared for it. So we now see developers, but also suppliers taking on unbalanced risk because they can't compensate for the cost increases, and that what's leading developers to walk away from PPAs, from projects, rethinking their engagement in certain markets. I think in terms of policy, I think at Vattenfall we find it very promising what the UK has announced in terms of the adjusted strike price for auction round 6. I think in terms of also predictability, it's essential that the government also provides transparency on the reference price, but also on the overall budget available, because that's in the end what lets us as developers determine what price levels we might be able to achieve. In general, I think also in the sense of standardization and really focusing on what we're best at, I think there's the topic of grid access. So from our point of view, the connection to the central transmission system should be part of the responsibility of the state. That's the model that we're seeing in the Netherlands, in Germany, in the UK, in Norway, in Sweden. That falls under the responsibility of the developer, and that heavily limits us then also to invest in other areas. So that's definitely a factor for any upcoming allocation schemes, for support schemes. I think this indexation question is going to be key, at least as long as we don't really know how the market is developing. And again, it's a tricky topic. What do you index to? Is that general inflation? I think that's been done. It hasn't worked really well. We've seen steel prices skyrocket. So I think that's an interesting question to solve. And there are more. I think I mentioned briefly the auction criteria. I think it was mentioned as well by you just now. So I think it would be prudent to use more sort of pre-qualification criteria and non-price criteria to ensure that also the developers and then the industry innovate in areas that help also the sustainable build-out of offshore wind. So on cyclicality, sustainability topics, but also integration of more and more offshore wind into the grid, which is also something I think that we haven't touched upon, which when we look at these offshore wind targets, that becomes a bigger and bigger issue.
Yeah, so I mean a whole range of issues and challenges there. You mentioned the UK. Okay, I mean not the UK's finest hour. It's fair to say the last year with the auction that got no bidders, and as many here will know, I mean that was flagged way out by the industry that this would be the outcome, and yet the policymakers didn't change course, and so it came to pass, no bidders. Vattenfall really sent, I think it's fair to say, a shockwave through not just the UK industry, but the global industry when you made your announcement about Norfolk Boreas, the North Sea project that your CEO said we can't advance this. It's not viable under the current terms. I mean, can I ask you, you've talked about how the UK's made some promising signals with the higher minimum strike prices for the next auction. I think we saw some concessions from the UK Chancellor only yesterday about investment and allowances. Is there a way back for that project, do you think?
Yes, I think for sure. I think Vattenfall is continued to be committed to the UK market. We believe it's a very interesting market for us. It will continue to to grow strongly. And I think it's both in our interest, but also in the interest of the UK government to see the Norfolk project zone being built. So I obviously can't say when that will be and how that will happen and by whom, but I think in the end the Norfolk projects are very attractive projects, and they're key to also the offshore wind industry in the UK. So I think all parties want to see these projects completed.
So we maybe haven't seen the last of it yet, is what you're saying, yeah. Okay, I mean, we're talking quickly about auctions. I mean, you mentioned earlier about uncapped negative bidding, however you want to term it. I mean, this is a controversial, very controversial matter, because it's been said by a number of people that this method of allocating seabed has really kind of effectively opened the door to the deepest pocket winds, and that has piled all sorts of pressures on the industry, on the supply chain, because then cost becomes the dominant factor to a degree that maybe wasn't sensible. I mean, do governments need to be more sensible about this whole approach of, I mean, we understand that they want revenue from their seabed, but they also want green power, and they've set targets for green power. So maybe they can't have it both ways. Do you think there's a rethink needed on this whole area of kind of uncapped bidding in auctions?
Well, I think from our point of view, that's certainly our wish. I think it's we don't believe that it's sort of the best allocation of funds to spend them on negative bidding, and we think we could better use them at things that we're good at, and that's helping innovate, and also I think specifically talking about Vattenfall as an integrated utility, we're quite well placed, I think, with our diversified portfolio to in our core markets manage the integration of offshore wind and increasing amounts of offshore wind into the grid. So I think that's maybe a place where that money is better spent. At the same time, I'm also no expert on auction design, but I do think that this will also play itself out. So I think I don't know if you look at what has happened in Germany. I think it's unsure whether also this willingness to pay will continue when the oil and gas industry has secured energy for their refineries business. But we will see. But for sure, Vattenfall would prefer more focus on qualitative criteria rather than financial.
Okay. I think we're coming towards the end of our time. But would anyone like to ask a question from the audience? Because my colleague here can get you a microphone. If anybody would like to ask the panel anything based on what we've heard so far, then please feel free. We have a couple of candidates.
Yeah, good morning. Guido van der Bos, NOV. You've been touching on, all of you, on indeed innovation and standardization, and then refocusing the innovation in, let's say, install base and stuff like that. When that's not going to happen, because it will be needed, because otherwise these wind installation developments will run into an issue. So does the EU needs to enforce it or support it to create maybe 1,000 feet tip height, or does developers like the Vattenfalls or Equinor have to define a 10-year kind of block of development? So how would you, as a panel, see that going forward?
Anyone like to take that? John?
Yeah, I'll take the chance on that. It's a complicated issue, but I think we should look to EU again. If you look at the last communication from the EU in terms of pre-qualification, CFD suggestions to the European governments, how to create collaboration between governments in terms of this is what we want to achieve in the next 10 years, 15 gigawatts a year, licensing, etc. I think that will drive the industry, and that will create capacity need. Developers will want to build this, and governments have to put some cash behind it, some criterias. I don't think we'll see specific standardization criterias, but I think we will see criterias which will allow for capacity building. And if you don't have standardization, you will not get that capacity. So the challenge here is to understand how does developers build what governments want to have built, and how does supply chain invest in enough capacity to build those projects. And I don't think it's only about capacity in terms of steel or factories. I think it's also a question of capacity in terms of skills and manpower. So I think governments, if they want to have built, if they want to achieve their ambitions, they need to see the whole picture. And I think with the help of EU, I think they're about to see that picture. So I think they will use CFDs. I think there will be pre-qualification criterias. I think there will be skills movement by governments in terms of creating the skill to create that industry. I think developers need to work with suppliers for more framework agreements, which will allow supply chain to build those factories, to have the capacity to build those projects. So I think this will work. So I'm an optimist.
Good.
But I think we are in a stage where interest rates, cost in general, is kind of putting a pressure on governments to understand how this might be working. So I think with the help of political policymakers and those who are giving them inputs, I think they will see this and move ahead. We've seen that in the UK lately. We might see it in other countries in Europe as well.
Anyone else like to chip in on this one?
Just to echo you, Jon, resources. We do not have resources today to do these enormous innovations continuously all along the next years. We don't have them. So here also from a policy maker point of view, make sure that we have enough universities or people that can do actually the work. And if you're always moving to something new, you cannot reproduce what you've already done. Another topic is with always going to the next level is environmental impact. If we have to invest, we want that net zero into 2050. And of course, if we can, yes, maybe smaller than the biggest turbine ever, but maybe that can have a lower footprint overall. If you have a mass scale, mass standardization, could be. Also thinking about the next step after the construction, you have to also keep it maintained. You have to keep it running. And who's doing that if you have hundreds and hundreds of different types of equipment all the time?
Okay. Any more for any more? I think. I think we've had a really interesting panel here. Diverse perspectives, and I think we've touched upon some of the absolutely key issues that the industry is facing. So I am going to thank all our panelists here, and I'm also going to say that it is lunchtime. It's time for the lunch break. So please go through and get some refreshments and some lunch. Before you do, or while you are, I would urge you to fill out our survey so that if you think we're doing a good job, you can say, or if you don't think we're doing a good job, you can say. The incentive, and I hope it's seen as an incentive, is 3 months free recharge. And if you're already a recharge subscriber, first of all, thank you. Secondly, you'll get a credit. And you can also win a complimentary ticket for one of our events next year. And again, I hope you see that as an incentive. But please enjoy lunch, and please thank our panelists. You've been terrific.